Mom, we're canceling your birthday dinner. My son said 3 hours before my 70th birthday celebration was supposed to begin. Lauren's finally closing on the beach house today, and we're all heading there instead. I stood in my kitchen holding the wooden spoon I'd been using to stir gravy, listening to the silence that followed his words. Behind me, the roast was still in the oven. The candles were already arranged across the dining table. I had spent 2 full days preparing everything exactly the way my late husband used to love. Oh, I said softly, because after 70 years of life, sometimes one small word carries more heartbreak than screaming ever could. Well, congratulations to Lauren. Michael cleared his throat on the other end of the phone. I could hear laughter in the background. Music. Glasses clinking. Yeah, thanks, Mom. We'll celebrate with you another time, okay? Another time. People always say that when they know, they probably never will. Of course, I replied. Drive safely. He sounded relieved when I didn't argue. Thanks for understanding. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly and stared at my reflection in the dark microwave door. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman standing there. My silver hair was neatly curled. I was wearing the pale blue sweater Michael bought me 6 Christmases ago, back when he still remembered what my favorite color was. I had even put on lipstick for tonight, a soft rose shade Evelyn Carter would never have worn just to sit alone. The dining room looked beautiful, too beautiful for one person. I walked toward the table and adjusted the white plates one more time, even though they were already perfectly centered. 7 place settings. Michael, Lauren, Sophie, my sister Diane and her husband, Helen Brooks from next door, and me at the head of the table where Harold used to sit beside me every birthday for 42 years. His chair was still there. I never moved it. Some habits survive grief because changing them feels too much like betrayal. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily while steam rose from the mashed potatoes. The smell of rosemary and butter filled the house. Everything felt warm except my chest. I told myself it wasn't personal. People get busy. Families change. Children grow older and build lives of their own. That was what I'd been telling myself for years now. But deep down, another voice had started whispering something colder, something harder to ignore. At exactly 6:12 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A social media notification. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. Lauren had posted photos already. In the first picture, she stood barefoot on a massive oceanfront deck, holding a champagne glass high in the air, while the sunset painted the sky orange and gold behind her. Michael stood beside her with one arm wrapped around her waist. Sophie smiled between them, wearing a white sundress I'd bought for her birthday last spring. The caption underneath read, "Celebrating new beginnings with the people who matter most." I stared at that sentence for a long time. The people who matter most. Then I swiped to the next photo. Michael laughing beside Lauren's parents. Sophie eating cake. A group selfie under string lights overlooking the beach. Everyone smiling. Everyone together. My thumb hovered over the screen as something sharp settled quietly inside me. Not anger. Anger burns hot and loud. This felt different. Colder. Heavier. Like finally stepping outside during winter and realizing the storm had been there long before you noticed the snow. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and turned off the oven. The roast suddenly smelled like wasted effort. I moved carefully around the kitchen, wrapping leftovers into containers no one would eat tonight. The motions felt automatic, mechanical, as though my body had rehearsed disappointment enough times to know the routine by heart. Outside, headlights passed slowly across my curtains as neighbors returned home to their own dinners and conversations and noisy families. Across the street, someone laughed while unloading grocery bags from a car. Somewhere nearby, music drifted faintly through the summer air. Life continued normally for everyone else, while my carefully planned evening folded quietly into nothing. I carried the birthday cake to the refrigerator. Chocolate with buttercream frosting. "Happy 70th birthday, Mom," written in blue icing across the top. Sophie had wanted extra candles this year because she thought 70 deserved something dramatic. I smiled a little remembering that. Then I opened the refrigerator door and slid the untouched cake onto the middle shelf beside leftover cranberry sauce and a carton of milk. The candles remained unlit in the box. When I closed the refrigerator, the kitchen suddenly looked too clean, too still. That was when I noticed the envelope sitting near the fruit bowl. I almost forgot about it entirely. Earlier that afternoon, Helen had dropped it off after checking my mail while I was gardening. My name was written across the front in Harold's handwriting. I felt my breath catch instantly. Harold had been gone almost 4 years. Slowly, I sat down at the kitchen table and picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was yellowed slightly at the edges, like it had been hidden away for a long time. On the front, beneath my name, Harold had written one sentence in blue ink. For the day you finally see them clearly. I did not open Harold's letter that night. I wish I could tell you it was because I was strong or wise, but the truth was simpler than that. I was afraid of what he might have known. Afraid that somewhere inside that envelope was proof that the loneliness I had spent years excusing was not accidental after all. I left the letter on the kitchen table and turned off the lights one by one before going upstairs. The house creaked softly beneath my feet the same way it always had. Harold used to say old houses sounded alive at night because they carried memories in the walls. Back then, I thought that sounded romantic. Now it only sounded sad. Our bedroom still looked almost exactly the same as it had the morning he left for the hospital 4 years earlier. His navy robe still hung behind the door. His reading glasses rested on the nightstand beside an unfinished mystery novel he never got to finish. People always ask why widows keep things untouched for so long. The answer is simple. Some objects become proof that your life was real before everyone else moved on without you. I changed into my nightgown slowly and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the dark television screen across the room. My phone buzzed again. Another photo notification from Lauren. This time it was a family picture around a fire pit near the beach. Michael sat beside her smiling while Sophie roasted marshmallows between them. Lauren's mother leaned into the frame, wearing one of those oversized white sweaters women buy in expensive coastal boutiques. Everyone looked effortless, relaxed, like they belonged in one another's lives naturally. I noticed something strange after a while. Michael smiled differently in Lauren's photos than he used to smile with me. The expression looked practiced now, careful, like a man constantly trying to prove he belonged in a world more polished than the one he came from. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. Suddenly, another memory surfaced without warning. 3 years ago at Christmas, Michael called me 2 hours before dinner and said Sophie had developed a slight fever, so they needed to cancel. I spent that evening alone eating reheated stuffing while snow piled against the windows outside. The next morning, Diane accidentally posted pictures online from Lauren's family gathering. Sophie looked perfectly healthy building gingerbread houses beside her cousins. I remembered staring at those pictures while my coffee went cold beside me. At the time, Michael apologized and blamed a misunderstanding. Lauren apparently changed plans at the last minute. "You know how hectic the holidays get, Mom," he had said. I believed him because mothers spend most of their lives wanting to believe their children are good people. Another memory followed. Sophie's dance recital last spring. Lauren texted me the wrong start time by nearly an hour. By the time I arrived, parents were already filing out carrying flowers and balloons. I found Sophie in the hallway still wearing her recital makeup. "Grandma," she said sadly, "I looked for you during my solo." Lauren immediately jumped in with that smooth, apologetic voice of hers. "Oh no, Evelyn, did I send the wrong time again? I swear my brain has been everywhere lately." Again, as if repeated exclusions were charming little accidents instead of wounds. At 70 years old, you begin noticing patterns more clearly because you no longer have enough time left to waste pretending coincidence explains everything. I lay awake for nearly 2 hours remembering things I had ignored for years. Birthdays moved without telling me. Vacations planned quietly. Family dinners shortened whenever I arrived. Conversations stopping the second I entered a room. Small things individually, heavy things together. Somewhere after midnight, rain began tapping lightly against the windows. I finally got out of bed and walked downstairs barefoot. The kitchen smelled faintly like extinguished candles and cold gravy. Harold's envelope still sat exactly where I left it beneath the overhead light. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down slowly at the table. My hands looked older tonight. The veins more visible. The skin thinner. Funny how betrayal ages you faster than time ever could. For a long moment, I simply stared at Harold's handwriting. He had beautiful handwriting. Steady. Thoughtful. Even his grocery lists looked elegant. I traced the edge of the envelope carefully before finally opening it. Inside was a folded letter and a second sealed envelope marked with my name again. The paper smelled faintly like cedar and old books. Harold always kept important papers locked inside the study cabinet beside his pipe collection. My chest tightened as I unfolded the letter. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then something I feared has finally happened. I pray I am wrong. But if I know our son as well as I think I do, he has spent too many years confusing love with approval. And people like Lauren survive by making others feel replaceable. I stopped reading for a moment because suddenly the house felt very quiet around me. Rain slid down the kitchen windows while the refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. Harold's words sat heavy in my lap, like he was speaking directly across time. I continued slowly. You always saw the best in people, Evelyn. It is one of the reasons I loved you. But sometimes seeing the best in people means you miss the truth standing right in front of you, especially when it comes to family. My eyes burned suddenly, not from grief this time, from recognition, because deep down, I already knew Harold had been right. The next morning arrived gray and humid, the kind of July morning where the air already feels heavy before sunrise. I barely slept. Harold's letter remained folded beside my coffee cup, while rainwater still clung to the backyard windows in thin silver streaks. I read his words 3 times before finally opening the second envelope he had left for me. Inside was a single document and a handwritten note clipped neatly to the front. Evelyn, if things ever become difficult, show this to Helen. She will understand what to do. My stomach tightened immediately. Harold had trusted Helen Brooks with something important enough to prepare for years in advance. That alone unsettled me. Helen and Harold had always gotten along well. She and her husband Walter used to spend summers with us in Cape May before Walter passed away. But Harold was not dramatic by nature. He did not leave mysterious letters unless he truly believed they would matter someday. I adjusted my reading glasses and examined the document carefully. Most of it was legal language involving property shares, investment accounts, and something connected to Michael's old financial troubles nearly 12 years earlier. Certain phrases jumped out immediately. Equity transfer, temporary protection clause, secondary ownership contingency. I understood just enough to realize one thing very clearly. The beach house was not entirely Michael and Lauren's. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Michael. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Morning, Mom, he said casually, sounding distracted. Waves crashed faintly somewhere behind him. Morning. Sorry again about last night. Things got hectic after closing. I looked down at Harold's letter resting beside my hand. I am sure they did. Michael hesitated. Lauren feels bad too. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because after years of marriage, I had learned there are certain sentences people only use when they want to avoid responsibility. Lauren feels bad. Lauren did not mean it. Lauren got overwhelmed. Somehow, every painful thing arrived gift-wrapped in excuses. Well, I replied quietly. I hope the beach house was worth it. Silence lingered on the line for half a second too long. Then Michael cleared his throat. Mom, do not do that. Do what? Make me feel guilty for trying to support my wife. There it was. The shift. So subtle most people would miss it entirely. Suddenly the problem was not what he had done. The problem was my reaction to it. I stared out the kitchen window at Harold's old bird feeder, swaying gently in the breeze. I spent 2 days cooking, Michael. I know. Your daughter helped me pick out candles. Mom. And you canceled 3 hours before dinner. He exhaled sharply now, impatience creeping into his voice. You are acting like we abandoned you. We just celebrated somewhere else this year. Somewhere else this year. As though 70 years of birthdays could be measured against one oceanfront property and found inconvenient. I closed my eyes briefly. Did Lauren tell you to call? Another silence. This one answered everything. She thought you sounded upset online. Online. You did not like any of the photos. For a moment, I genuinely could not speak. I sat there stunned by the absurdity of it. My son canceled my birthday dinner, spent the evening celebrating another woman's dream house, and now they were monitoring whether I clicked a heart beneath their pictures. Michael, I said softly, when did your life become something performed for strangers? He laughed awkwardly. Come on, Mom. It is social media. It is not that serious. But it was serious. Because people eventually become whatever version of themselves receives the most applause. Lauren understood that better than anyone. Every holiday with her became a photo shoot. Every dinner required perfect lighting. Every vacation existed less as a memory and more as content. Sometimes I wondered whether she even experienced happiness privately anymore, or only through the approval of other people watching her life unfold through a screen. We are hosting a housewarming dinner. Saturday, Michael continued. You should come. I almost declined immediately. Then something stopped me. Maybe it was Harold's letter. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending not to notice things. Or maybe I simply wanted to see the place that had become more important than my 70th birthday. All right, I said finally. I will come. His relief was immediate. Great. Sophie misses you. That hurt more than anything else, because I knew Sophie probably did miss me. Children still love honestly before adults teach them how to perform loyalty selectively. After we hung up, I folded Harold's papers carefully and placed them back inside the envelope. Then I called Helen. She answered on the second ring. Well, she said calmly before I could speak. I was wondering how long it would take before you opened that letter. I gripped the phone tighter. Helen, I whispered, what exactly did Harold know? She was quiet for a moment, long enough that I could hear a clock ticking faintly somewhere inside her house. More than you think, she replied softly, and probably less than he feared. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds for the first time that morning, casting pale gold across the empty dining room, where 7 untouched place settings still sat exactly where I had left them the night before. Helen arrived 40 minutes later carrying a peach pie and wearing the same beige raincoat she had owned since the late 1990s. Some people change dramatically with age. Helen never did. She still wore her silver hair pinned neatly at the neck, still carried hard candies in her purse, still walked with the calm confidence of a woman who had survived enough disappointments to stop fearing new ones. She stepped into my kitchen, took one look at my face, and sighed softly. You finally know, she said. I nodded without speaking. Helen placed the pie carefully on the counter before sitting across from me at the dining room table. The untouched place settings from my birthday dinner remained exactly where they had been for almost 24 hours now. She glanced at them briefly but did not comment. True friends understand when silence matters more than comfort. I handed her Harold's papers. She adjusted her glasses and began reading slowly while morning sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors between us. Outside, sprinklers clicked rhythmically somewhere down the block. Everything looked painfully normal. I told him not to wait this long, Helen murmured eventually. But Harold always believed Michael would come to his senses eventually. What exactly happened 12 years ago? I asked quietly. Helen folded the papers carefully before answering. Your son almost lost everything. The words settled heavily in the room. After that software business failed, Michael owed more money than he admitted. Credit cards, business loans, tax penalties. He was drowning, Evelyn. I stared at her in shock. Michael had always described that period as a temporary setback. A rough year. He never mentioned financial ruin. Why did nobody tell me? Helen looked at me gently. Because Harold did not want you frightened after your surgery. And because your husband handled most of it himself. I felt suddenly cold despite the summer heat pressing against the windows. Handled it how? Helen hesitated only briefly. He refinanced this house. My eyes moved instinctively around the dining room. The pale green walls Harold painted himself. The china cabinet built by his father. The chandelier we bought after saving for nearly 3 years when Michael was little. This house held almost every important memory of my adult life. He risked our home. To save your son, yes. I sat back slowly in my chair, stunned by the weight of everything I never knew. Helen continued carefully. The bank would not approve the full amount unless additional protections were included. Harold insisted on creating certain ownership contingencies connected to future family property investments. She tapped the documents lightly, including the beach house. Suddenly pieces began sliding together in my mind. Lauren's obsession with appearances. Michael's desperate need to maintain the lifestyle she wanted. The expensive vacations. The designer furniture. The endless renovations displayed online like trophies. Does Lauren know any of this? Helen almost smiled. I seriously doubt it. I stood and walked slowly toward the kitchen window. Across the yard, Harold's tomato plants leaned heavily in the morning sun. He used to spend entire Saturdays out there trimming vines while Michael chased fireflies around the grass after dinner. For years I held on to those memories like proof that good families stay good forever. But maybe families change gradually, while mothers keep staring backward too long to notice. There is more, Helen said quietly behind me. I turned back toward her. Michael missed 3 payments on the beach house loan this spring. My stomach dropped. What? Harold's old attorney contacted me because your name is still attached to one portion of the ownership structure. Legally, certain notifications had to be documented. I could barely process what I was hearing. Michael never said anything. Of course he did not. Helen's voice remained calm but firm. People living beyond their means rarely announce it proudly. I sank back into my chair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed softly nearby, while sunlight continued crawling across the tablecloth from my abandoned birthday dinner. Finally, I whispered the question sitting deepest in my chest. Did Harold think Lauren married Michael for money? Helen's expression softened slightly. No. I think Harold believed Lauren married Michael because she liked what money made her feel like. That answer somehow hurt worse. Because greed can sometimes be obvious. But insecurity disguised as ambition is harder to recognize until years have already passed. Helen reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. Evelyn, listen to me carefully. You are not imagining this. What happened last night was cruel. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. That is because decent women spend their whole lives minimizing their own pain to keep peace inside their families. Her words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I thought about every holiday excuse, every awkward silence, every moment I swallowed disappointment so Michael would not feel uncomfortable. Somewhere along the way, protecting my son from guilt became more important than protecting myself from hurt. Helen released my hand and nodded toward Harold's papers. The housewarming dinner on Saturday may become very interesting. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? She leaned back calmly. I mean, Lauren believes that Beach House proves she finally won. Won what? Helen looked directly at me then. Your son. The room fell silent again after that. Not loud silence. Not angry silence. Just the kind that arrives when somebody finally says the truth out loud for the first time. Saturday arrived bright and unbearably hot. The kind of coastal summer day people photograph for vacation brochures. I drove toward the beach house with both hands tied on the steering wheel while sunlight flashed across the windshield in long white streaks. The closer I got to the shoreline, the more expensive everything looked. White fences, perfect landscaping, luxury SUVs parked beside oversized homes painted in shades called things like sea mist and driftwood pearl. Lauren loved places like this because nothing here looked accidental. Every porch chair matched. Every hydrangea bush bloomed on command. The beach house itself stood 3 stories tall, overlooking the water with enormous windows facing the ocean. It looked less like a home and more like something designed to be admired from a distance. Several luxury cars already filled the driveway when I arrived. I sat inside my car for a moment staring at the front entrance while voices drifted faintly through the open balcony doors above. Laughter, music, glasses clinking again. Always the sound of celebration lately. I finally stepped out carrying the lemon bars Sophie used to love when she was younger. Before social media diets and gluten-free phases became part of Lauren's personality. The front door opened before I even knocked. Sophie ran toward me immediately. "Grandma," she shouted, wrapping her arms around my waist. For one brief moment, everything inside me softened. Children still love with their whole hearts before adulthood teaches caution. "There is my favorite girl," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. "I saved you the room with." "The seashell pillows," she announced proudly. Behind her, Lauren appeared wearing white linen pants and oversized sunglasses pushed neatly into her blonde hair. She smiled warmly enough for anyone watching nearby. "Evelyn, you made it." Her voice carried that polished sweetness she used around guests. The kind designed to sound caring without requiring sincerity. "Of course," I replied calmly. "Would not miss the celebration." Her eyes flickered briefly across my face as though searching for signs of resentment. I gave her none. That seemed to disappoint her slightly. Inside, the house smelled faintly of expensive candles and ocean air. Everything looked staged carefully. Decorative books no one had read. Cream-colored furniture too pristine for real life. Giant framed photographs of Lauren and Michael laughing on beaches and boats and rooftop restaurants. Their entire marriage displayed like an advertisement for happiness. "Mom." Michael appeared from the kitchen carrying a drink tray. He kissed my cheek quickly before glancing toward the guests behind him. "Glad you came." He looked tired beneath the smile. I noticed that immediately. small shadows beneath his eyes, tension around his mouth. The expression of a man holding together a life that costs more energy than it gives back. Beautiful house, I said softly. Lauren has incredible taste, he replied automatically. Not we. Lauren. Interesting. Throughout the afternoon, people floated through the rooms complimenting the ocean view and marble countertops, while Lauren guided tours like a real estate agent showing off her greatest achievement. She corrected Michael twice when he spoke, rearranged Sophie's dress before photos, reminded everyone which imported champagne cost nearly $400 per bottle. The entire gathering revolved around appearances. Every conversation somehow circled back to success, status, renovations, or future plans. At one point, I stood quietly near the upstairs balcony watching waves crash below the cliffs while Lauren entertained two women near the outdoor bar. The previous owners completely lacked vision, she said loudly enough for half the deck to hear. Honestly, once you remove outdated family attachments, transforming a place becomes easy. One of the women laughed politely. You are brave taking on such a massive project. Lauren smiled confidently. Michael trusts my instincts. He knows I can turn almost anything into something worth showing off. Her eyes drifted toward me briefly as she said it. Not directly cruel. Lauren rarely operated directly. Her talent existed in implication, in carefully chosen phrases that sounded harmless unless you understood the target. I remained silent and looked back toward the ocean. Years ago, comments like that would have ruined my entire evening. Today, they simply confirmed things I already knew. Later, while guests gathered downstairs for dinner, I wandered accidentally into the hallway near the master bedroom, searching for the restroom. That was when I heard Lauren's voice through the slightly open office door. No, seriously, she whispered sharply. If Evelyn eventually moves into assisted living, everything becomes simpler. I froze instantly. Another woman laughed softly inside the room. Do you really think Michael would do that? Lauren sighed impatiently. Please. He already feels guilty anytime she is alone for too long. It is only a matter of time before he starts talking about senior communities. My chest tightened so suddenly I had to grip the hallway wall. Lauren continued casually. Honestly, this generation refuses to let go gracefully. They hang on to giant houses and emotional baggage forever. Silence followed briefly before she added with a small laugh. At least once the paperwork settles completely, we will finally have real freedom. Paperwork. My mind immediately flashed back to Harold's documents sitting locked inside my desk drawer at home. I stepped quietly away from the doorway before either woman noticed me standing there. Downstairs, guests laughed around the dining table while sunlight poured golden across the ocean beyond the windows. Everything looked beautiful. Perfect even. But beauty built on exclusion eventually develops cracks no amount of expensive lighting can hide. Michael spotted me descending the staircase and smiled uncertainly. Everything. Okay, Mom. I looked at my son carefully then. Really looked at him. At the nervousness behind his expression. The exhaustion. The constant need to maintain peace around a woman who treated life like competition. And for the first time in years, I stopped seeing him as only my little boy. I saw him as a grown man making choices. Yes, I answered quietly. Everything is becoming much clearer now. The drive home from the beach felt longer than usual, even though traffic was light along the coast highway. The ocean remained visible beside me for miles, glittering beneath the late afternoon sun like something peaceful and untouched. Funny how nature continues looking beautiful no matter what kind of ugliness people carry inside themselves. I kept replaying Lauren's words in my head. Assisted living. Real freedom. Emotional baggage. She had spoken about my life the way someone discusses outdated furniture waiting to be removed from a room. What unsettled me most was not the cruelty itself. It was how ordinary she sounded saying it. Casual. Comfortable. Like she had rehearsed those thoughts so many times they no longer felt harsh to her at all. When I arrived home, the house greeted me with its familiar stillness. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the hallway. Harold's wind chimes moved gently outside the kitchen window. Everything here felt smaller than the beach house. Older too. But unlike Lauren's carefully staged world, this place still felt honest. I changed into comfortable clothes, tied my hair back, and stood quietly in the kitchen for several minutes staring at the envelope Harold left behind. Then I finally carried it into his old study. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and dust. Harold's desk remained exactly the way he left it, pens aligned carefully beside stacked legal pads. His favorite reading lamp angled toward the leather chair where he used to sit every evening reviewing paperwork after dinner. Some people leave behind photographs when they die. Harold left behind systems. Order. Quiet preparation. I unlocked the bottom drawer and removed the full folder connected to Michael's financial history. Helen was right. Harold documented everything. Loan agreements, property transfers, bank correspondence, pages and pages of legal language highlighting protections connected to future investments. My name appeared repeatedly throughout the documents beside ownership percentages and contingency clauses I barely understood. But one sentence became very clear very quickly. In the event of unresolved default or forced sale, secondary equity holder retains final approval authority regarding property disposition. I read that line 3 times. Final approval authority. My hands trembled slightly as realization settled over me. The beach house could not legally be sold, refinanced, or fully transferred without my involvement. Lauren did not know that. Michael probably forgot years ago. But Harold remembered. Harold prepared. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts around 7 that evening. Helen stood on the porch holding 2 grocery bags and wearing an expression that told me she already suspected I had started reading everything. You skipped dinner at the beach house early, she said while stepping inside. That usually means either wisdom or trouble. Maybe both. She placed the grocery bags onto the counter and removed 2 containers of Chinese takeout. I brought noodles because serious conversations require carbohydrates. I laughed quietly for the first time in days. Helen had always understood that survival sometimes depends on finding tiny reasons to keep breathing normally. We ate at the kitchen table beneath the soft yellow light while evening rain began tapping against the windows again. I showed her the documents without speaking much. She read carefully while chewing slowly on sesame chicken. There it is, she murmured eventually. Harold's insurance policy. Against Lauren? Helen shook her head gently. No. Against desperation. I frowned slightly. She folded the papers neatly before continuing. Your husband loved Michael deeply, Evelyn. But he knew your son had a dangerous weakness. Michael wants approval more than stability. Men like that often attach themselves to strong personalities because it feels easier than building confidence themselves. I stared down at my untouched noodles. So Harold thought Lauren would eventually control him. I think Harold worried Michael would hand over control willingly just to avoid conflict. That answer landed painfully because it felt true. Even as a child, Michael hated disappointing people. He apologized constantly. Shared toys he still wanted. Changed opinions depending on who sounded most certain. I used to think those traits made him kind. Maybe they simply made him easy to influence. Helen took a sip of tea and lowered her voice slightly. There is another reason Harold protected the property legally. What reason? She hesitated briefly. Last spring, Michael called me asking if I thought you would ever consider selling this house. My chest tightened instantly. What? He said maintaining such a large place alone might become difficult eventually. He tried sounding casual about it. I looked around my kitchen slowly. The faded curtains I sewed myself 20 years ago. Harold's coffee mug drying beside the sink. Sophie's school drawings still taped near the refrigerator. Suddenly the house no longer felt simply old. It felt threatened. Did Lauren put him up to it? Helen sighed softly. Evelyn, by now I do not think it matters whose idea starts where anymore. That silence afterward felt heavier than anything else we discussed all evening. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Somewhere along the way, my son stopped protecting the people who loved him most and started protecting the life he was afraid to lose instead. Around 9:30, Helen gathered her purse and prepared to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at me carefully. You know, she said quietly, women our age spend decades believing endurance is the same thing as love. I crossed my arms tightly against the cool evening air drifting through the screen door. What if it is? Helen smiled sadly. Then why are you the only one hurting? After she left, I stood alone in the hallway for a long time listening to rain strike the roof above me. Upstairs, Harold's side of the closet remained untouched. Downstairs, legal papers sat spread across the dining room table where my birthday dinner should have been. And, for the first time in years, I stopped asking myself how to keep this family together. Instead, I started wondering why I had been carrying the entire weight of it alone. Monday morning arrived unusually cool for July. I woke before sunrise and sat alone on the back porch wrapped in Harold's old cardigan while the neighborhood slowly came to life around me. Sprinklers hissed across nearby lawns. A delivery truck rumbled somewhere down the block. Birds gathered near the feeder Harold built 15 years ago from leftover cedar planks in the garage. For the first time in a long while, the silence around me did not feel empty. It felt clarifying. There is a strange peace that arrives once confusion finally leaves your life. Pain remains, of course, but uncertainty disappears. By 8 o'clock, I had already showered, dressed, and organized every document Harold left behind into neat folders across the dining room table. Ownership agreements, loan records, legal correspondence, payment notices connected to the beach house. The deeper I looked, the clearer everything became. Michael and Lauren were balancing on a financial ledge much narrower than their social media photographs suggested. The property taxes alone looked staggering. Renovation loans, missed payments, deferred balances. Their entire lifestyle seemed held together by appearances and optimism. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Loved having you at the house this weekend. Sophie wants to know if you can watch her next Friday while we meet with the designer. I stared at the message for several seconds. Not one mention of my birthday. Not one acknowledgement of canceling dinner. Just another request. Another assumption that my time, my energy, my presence would always remain available whenever convenient. I typed slowly. I will need to check my schedule. 3 little dots appeared instantly, then disappeared, then reappeared again. Finally, her response came. Of course. Let me know soon because appointments in August are filling up fast. Even now, she still spoke to me like an assistant rather than family. I set the phone face down and continued sorting paperwork. Around noon, Michael called unexpectedly. Mom, do you have a minute? His voice sounded strained. I do. He hesitated briefly. Lauren mentioned you seemed a little distant Saturday. I almost smiled. Distant. Such a polite word for awakening. I was simply tired. Okay. Silence lingered awkwardly between us. Then he cleared his throat. Listen, there is something I wanted to ask you. Of course there was. Go ahead. Would you ever consider downsizing eventually? There it was. Not dramatic. Not cruel. Just carefully timed. Carefully softened. The same conversation Helen warned me about. I looked around the dining room slowly while sunlight pooled across Harold's old hardwood floors. Why do you ask? No reason, Michael answered too quickly. Lauren just thinks a smaller place might be easier for you eventually. Less maintenance. More freedom. Freedom. Funny how people always describe removing older women from their homes as liberation instead of loss. I see, I said quietly. Michael rushed onward before I could continue. And honestly, this market is incredible right now. You could probably get an amazing price for the property. Property. Not home. Property. Another subtle shift. Another clue hiding inside language. Michael, I asked softly, when was the last time you visited this house without needing something? Silence flooded the line immediately. In the background, I heard a car door slam somewhere near him followed by distant traffic noise. That is not fair, he said finally. Is it not? Mom, come on. You canceled my 70th birthday dinner. I apologized for that. Then 2 days later your wife started discussing assisted living arrangements for me in her upstairs office. Complete silence now. Heavy enough that I could hear his breathing change. What? He whispered. I heard her, Michael. He said nothing. Not because he did not believe me. Because somewhere deep down, he already knew exactly what kind of woman his wife had become. She did not mean it like that, he finally muttered weakly. Weakly. That was the word that struck me hardest. Not angry. Not protective. Weak. Then how did she mean it? He exhaled sharply. Lauren worries about you being alone. No, I said calmly. Lauren worries about inconvenience. Another silence followed. Longer this time. Then quietly, almost exhausted, Michael asked, what happened to us? The question surprised me. Because for the first time in years, he sounded less like a defensive husband and more like the confused little boy who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. I closed my eyes briefly. I think somewhere along the way, I answered softly, you started building a life that looked successful instead of one that actually felt meaningful. He did not respond immediately. Finally, he spoke so quietly I almost missed it. You think Lauren ruined me. I looked toward Harold's empty chair near the dining room window. No, I said honestly. I think you handed pieces of yourself away one compromise at a time. After we hung up, I sat alone for several minutes staring at my phone. Then slowly, carefully, I opened the final folder Harold left behind. Inside was a sealed letter addressed directly to Michael in Harold's handwriting. Across the front, one sentence had been written in dark blue ink. To be opened only when my son forgets who protected him first. For 3 days, I did not contact Michael. I did not send guilt-filled messages. I did not post cryptic quotes online the way people do when they want attention disguised as wisdom. I simply lived quietly inside my own house while the truth settled into place around me piece by piece. Sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation ever could. On Wednesday afternoon, I finally called Harold's attorney. Martin Reynolds sounded surprised to hear from me personally instead of through paperwork. "Mrs. Carter," he said warmly, "it has been too long. I believe my husband prepared for something before he passed away," I replied carefully. "And I think it is time I fully understand what he left behind." Martin became quiet immediately. "I wondered when you might call." 2 hours later, I sat across from him inside a cool office overlooking downtown while late summer heat shimmered across the streets outside. Martin had aged since Harold's funeral. More gray hair, thinner shoulders, but his voice remained steady and precise. He reviewed every document slowly while I listened without interrupting. The beach house ownership structure was far more complicated than Michael and Lauren likely realized. Harold designed it intentionally that way after refinancing our home to rescue Michael's collapsing business years earlier. "Your husband loved your son deeply," Martin explained gently. But he worried Michael confused generosity with permanence. I folded my hands tightly in my lap. "Meaning?" Martin removed his glasses carefully. "Meaning Harold feared that if Michael ever married someone overly focused on appearances or status, your son might prioritize maintaining that lifestyle over protecting long-term stability." My chest tightened because Harold had seen everything years before I did. Martin continued reviewing payment histories connected to the beach house. 3 missed loan installments. 1 extension request. Significant renovation debt already accumulating despite owning the property less than 6 months. "They are in financial trouble," I whispered quietly. Martin nodded once. "Not catastrophic yet, but they are stretched dangerously thin." He slid another document toward me. "And because your name remains tied to the secondary equity protections, you legally retain approval rights over several future financial actions connected to the property." I stared at the page slowly. "Including refinancing?" "Yes." "Selling?" "Yes." "Additional loans?" "Also yes." For a long moment, I simply sat there absorbing the weight of what Harold had quietly protected all those years ago. Lauren believed she had finally built the perfect life, but the foundation underneath it still carried my name. When I arrived home that evening, another social media post from Lauren waited on my phone. A professional photographer had apparently visited the beach house that afternoon. The pictures looked flawless. Sophie laughing on the deck. Michael pouring wine beside the ocean. Lauren standing barefoot near the water in a flowing cream-colored dress while sunlight surrounded her like a magazine advertisement. The caption read, "Building the future we deserve." I stared at that sentence for a very long time. Then I noticed something else. Michael was no longer smiling naturally in the photos. His eyes looked tired, distracted, like a man trying desperately to appear relaxed while standing in rising water. Around 7 o'clock, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Michael stood on the porch alone wearing jeans and the blue polo shirt I bought him last Father's Day. He looked exhausted, older somehow. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside without answering. Inside, he wandered slowly into the kitchen like someone returning to a childhood home after years away. His eyes moved across familiar objects automatically. The old coffee maker, Harold's chair, Sophie's drawing still taped near the refrigerator. "You kept everything the same," he murmured. "Your father liked things where they belonged." Michael nodded faintly before sitting at the kitchen table. Silence stretched between us while evening sunlight faded slowly across the counters. Finally he spoke. "Lauren and I got into an argument." I remained standing near the sink. "About what?" He laughed once without humor. "Everything." For several seconds, he rubbed both hands across his face before continuing. "The house costs more than we expected. Renovations, insurance, taxes. Lauren keeps saying once we refinance things will stabilize." "Refinance." There was that word again. "But you cannot refinance without my approval," I said calmly. Michael froze completely. Slowly, he looked up at me. What? I walked toward the dining room and returned carrying Harold's folder. Then carefully, without drama, I placed the documents onto the table between us. Michael stared down at the papers while confusion gradually shifted into disbelief. Dad did this. After he saved your business. His face went pale. You knew? Not until recently. Michael flipped through pages rapidly now. Loan agreements. Property contingencies. Legal protections. Payment histories. I watched realization spread across his face piece by piece like cracks moving through glass. Lauren does not know about any of this, he whispered. No, I replied softly. She does not. He leaned back heavily in the chair staring at nothing. Oh my God. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking clock near the hallway. Finally, Michael looked at me with an expression I had not seen in years. Not defensiveness. Not guilt. Shame. Mom, he said quietly. I think I have made a terrible mistake. I studied my son carefully then. The same boy whose scraped knees I bandaged. The same teenager Harold taught to shave standing beside this very sink. The same man who canceled my birthday dinner without truly understanding what he was sacrificing. No, I answered gently. You made many small mistakes for a very long time. Michael stayed at my kitchen table long after the coffee between us had gone cold. Outside, evenings settled slowly over the neighborhood, while porch lights flickered on one by one down the street. Somewhere nearby, children laughed while riding bicycles through the warm summer air. Ordinary life continued quietly around us, while my son finally confronted the truth he had spent years avoiding. He kept reading the documents over and over as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less painful. But paper does not soften reality. Why would Dad never tell me this? He asked eventually, his voice rough with disbelief. I folded my hands carefully in my lap. Because your father wanted you to succeed without feeling owned by his sacrifice. Michael stared down at the table, and instead I acted like none of it mattered. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The silence between parents and children changes with age. When they are young, silence usually means safety. When they grow older, silence often means regret. Finally, Michael rubbed both hands across his face and whispered, Lauren thinks refinancing the beach house will fix everything. Will it? He gave a hollow laugh. No, then more quietly he added. But I think she is terrified of failing. That sentence shifted something inside me unexpectedly. Because for the first time, Michael was not defending her behavior. He was simply seeing it clearly. Fear makes people do strange things, I said softly. Especially when they build their identity around appearances. He nodded faintly. She grew up with very little. Her parents lost their home twice when she was young. I think she promised herself she would never feel unstable again. I looked toward Harold's empty chair near the window. That explains her fear, Michael. It does not excuse how she treated people. He swallowed hard, but said nothing. Around 9 o'clock, his phone buzzed repeatedly across the table. Lauren's name flashed across the screen 3 times before he finally answered. Hey, he said quietly. Even from where I sat, I could hear the sharp tension in her voice through the speaker. Where are you? She demanded. Michael glanced toward me briefly. At Mom's. Why? Because we need to talk. Silence crackled faintly between them. Then Lauren lowered her voice. Michael, not tonight. Actually, he replied tiredly. It probably should have been years ago. He ended the call before she could answer. I watched him carefully after that. The exhaustion in his face looked deeper now. Not because of money or stress alone. Because maintaining illusions eventually drains people more than truth ever does. Before leaving, Michael stood slowly beside the kitchen doorway like a man unsure whether he still belonged inside his own childhood home. Mom, he said quietly, I am sorry about your birthday. The words hung gently in the room between us. Late. Incomplete. But real. I nodded once. I know. He looked surprised by my answer. Perhaps he expected anger. Or punishment. But age teaches you something important eventually. The opposite of love is not hatred. It is indifference. And despite everything, I still loved my son too much to become indifferent to him completely. Michael left shortly afterward carrying Harold's letter addressed to him inside his jacket pocket. I did not ask him to read it immediately. Some truths require solitude before they can fully land inside a person's heart. The next several weeks passed quietly, quieter than they had in years. Michael stopped posting cheerful photographs online. The beach house remained strangely absent from Lauren's social media for the first time since they bought it. Sophie spent more afternoons at my home again, helping me bake cookies and watching old movies from Harold's collection while rainstorms rolled through town. Children notice emotional weather long before adults admit storms exist. One afternoon in early August, Michael returned alone carrying a cardboard box filled with framed photographs from the beach house. Lauren moved into her sister's condo for a while. He explained quietly while setting the box near the hallway. I studied his face carefully. He looked tired still, but lighter somehow. Like someone finally setting down luggage carried too long. Are you all right? I asked softly. He considered the question honestly before answering. I do not know yet. Fair enough, I thought. Healing rarely arrives all at once. Several days later, Martin Reynolds finalized new paperwork restructuring the beach house debt. Michael decided to sell the property before things became worse financially. Lauren fought the decision at first according to Michael, insisting they could still save the image of the life they built together. But eventually, even she understood that photographs cannot hold up collapsing foundations forever. The house sold in late September to a retired couple from Connecticut who wanted somewhere peaceful to spend winters near the ocean. Michael came by that evening after signing the final documents. We sat together on the back porch watching sunset light spill softly across Harold's tomato garden while cool autumn air moved through the trees above us. Dad knew me better than I knew myself, Michael said quietly. I smiled faintly. That was one of his more irritating talents. Michael laughed softly for the first time in months. Then he looked toward me with tears gathering quietly in his eyes. Thank you for not giving up on me. I rested my hand gently over his. The same hand I once held crossing parking lots when he was little. Mothers do not stop loving their children, I said softly. But sometimes we finally learn to stop disappearing for them. The sky turned gold behind the trees while evening settled calmly around us. And for the first time in many years, I no longer felt invisible inside my own life.